All right, so we're diving into John C. Maxwell's How Successful People Think. And right off the bat, this book feels different. It's like a practical guide, not just some vague ideas about positive thinking.
Exactly. And I think we all appreciate that, right? Getting to the actionable stuff, because who's got time to wade through hundreds of pages of theory?
Right. And that's what makes Maxwell's book perfect for our deep dive today. It's all about actionable advice. He breaks these complex thinking styles down so well that you actually feel like you can use them.
You really do. And he starts with this idea of big picture thinking, which I love.
Yeah. It's like he's reminding us not to get lost in the weeds.
Hmm.
Like, are we focused on the right things to reach our goals?
Totally. Remember that story he tells about conferences?
You mean the one where everyone's worried about parking and where they're sitting, but he's zeroed in on what's happening on stage?
Yes, that's the one. It's a perfect example of how our perspective can either limit us or set us free. It makes you wonder what we might be missing in our own lives by not looking at the bigger picture. What about you? Think about a recent challenge where you seeing all sides of it, or just your little corner of the situation.
It's so easy to get stuck in our own heads. But the good news is Maxwell gives us actual steps for cultivating this big picture thinking. Embracing uncertainty, learning from everything, even failures, especially failures, he says, and seeking out different perspectives to broaden our horizons.
Absolutely. It's like he's saying, get out of your comfort zone and expand your world.
Yes. And once you've got that bigger picture, then Maxwell says you need that laser focus to actually make those big ideas happen. He calls it focused thinking.
And the golf story he tells is perfect for this.
Oh, you mean how we can sabotage our own focus if we don't even have the right target in mind? Like that missing pin on the golf course?
Exactly. I love that story because it shows that focus isn't about just trying really hard. It's about identifying the right things to focus on in the first place.
It's like that quote, you can't hit a target you haven't identified.
So true. So what are your top priorities right now? And are you giving them enough focused attention? That's the question we should be asking ourselves.
It's about making choices. Right. And sometimes, Maxwell says, that means saying no to things, even limiting your social circle at times to create more space for deeper thinking.
Which is hard. But he makes a good point. What might you need to say no to in order to get more focused?
That's something to think about.
Yeah.
And this is where Maxwell might surprise you. He then goes on about the importance of realistic thinking.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in being overly optimistic, isn't it?
I love that Maxwell himself admits he had to kind of warm up to the idea of realistic thinking, too. He thought it was too negative at first.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive. But he makes a really good case for balancing out that optimism with a dose of realism. And he's not saying be pessimistic, right?
No, it's more like be prepared. He even encourages us to think about those worst-case scenarios, not to scare ourselves, but to get them out of the way and build confidence.
That's such a good point, and I think it goes hand in hand with something else he talks about. Asking ourselves, is this dream just for me or is it for everyone? That focus on honesty and including others, even when we're thinking strategically.
And speaking of strategic thinking, that's our next stop on this deep dive. It's like the bridge between having those big dreams and actually making them a reality.
And Maxwell walks the walk here, too. It's not just about planning, it's about action. He actually dedicates a half day each month just to planning out his schedule.
Imagine if we all did that.
Right. The possibilities, it's inspiring. But here's the thing about strategic thinking. It's not just for like CEOs and big time leaders, it's something we can all use. It can totally change how you handle any part of your life, from like planning your week to writing a speech to even just getting through traffic.
I like that.
Maxwell even talks about, get this, Maxwell House coffee making Passover Haggadahs.
Wait, really? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Apparently they've been doing it for years.
Wow. Never would have thought of that.
Right. It's such a cool example of how strategic thinking can lead to these unexpected connections. Makes you think, what parts of our lives could use a more strategic approach?
Maybe not a whole half day of planning.
Right.
Or even just an hour.
Exactly. Being intentional, thinking ahead, it makes a difference. And speaking of thinking big, that takes us to one of my favorite thinking styles. Possibility thinking.
Oh, yeah, this one's huge.
Right. Think about Star Wars. Like, that's possibility thinking in action.
Totally. Taking an idea that seems impossible and turning it into, well, Star Wars. What's your Star Wars idea? That thing you secretly dream about but think is totally out of reach.
It's easy to dismiss those dreams. But, even George Lucas, who was a self-proclaimed cynic,
Hmm.
even he used possibility thinking.
That's a good point.
He said it was like a defense mechanism
Right.
to help combat negativity.
So it's a choice.
Exactly, choosing to see the potential, even when it seems impossible. And it's not just about achieving our own dreams either. Maxwell tells this great story about a Walmart executive who learned about possibility thinking from Sam Walton himself.
Oh, wow.
And Walton's thing wasn't about just believing in business. It was about believing in people, seeing their potential even when they couldn't see it themselves.
I love that.
Right, so it's like this ripple effect. When you believe in possibilities, you create possibilities for yourself and everyone around you.
So how do we actually do that? How do we dream bigger?
It starts with taking that first step, even if it's outside your comfort zone. What's one thing you could do that might unlock a whole new world of possibilities?
That's a great question for everyone listening. Something to think about.
Definitely. And speaking of reflection, that's actually our next topic, reflective thinking. It's easy to overlook in our crazy busy world.
It's true. We're constantly bombarded with information and demands on our time.
Exactly. But taking time to pause, look back, learn from our experiences, it's crucial.
I like how Maxwell compares it to a crock pot for the mind.
Yes. It's about letting those thoughts simmer. And it's not just about dwelling on the past.
Right.
It's about understanding it so it can guide our future decisions and actions. Maxwell even has a system for this, remember?
You mean that thing he does where he writes down what he liked best and what he learned?
Yes. Simple, but so powerful. It's about making reflection a deliberate practice. And that's more important than ever these days with all the distractions we have.
Absolutely. So we've talked about thinking big, thinking realistically, thinking strategically. But now Maxwell throws us a bit of a curveball. He challenges us to question popular thinking.
Yes, I love this part. Thinking for yourself, even when it means going against the grain.
He doesn't hold back either. He calls popular thinking average, inflexible, even lazy.
And he's right. Popular thinking can lead to just following the crowd, and that can stifle creativity and innovation.
So what's the alternative?
Maxwell says real progress, true breakthroughs, those happen when we're willing to think differently, to challenge what everyone else takes for granted and explore those new possibilities.
It takes guts to do that, though,
Yeah.
To be like, what if, when everyone else is just nodding along?
It does. But growth requires some discomfort, right? Trying new things, seeing things from different angles.
Definitely. And speaking of different perspectives, that leads us right into shared thinking.
Yes. This is huge. Maxwell is all about collaboration. None of us is as smart as all of us.
So true. And it's not just about finding the right answer faster either. It's about those relationships, the
Yeah.
trust that comes from working together.
Absolutely. And feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. So how do we cultivate that kind of shared thinking?
Well, it starts with being open to other people's ideas, even if they're totally different from yours, and creating a space where people feel safe sharing those ideas.
That's so important. Psychological safety, right?
Yes. Everyone needs to feel heard and respected. That's when the magic happens.
And now for what might be the most important thinking style of all, unselfish thinking.
Right. It's a game changer, shifting that focus from what's in it for me to how can I help?
It's a powerful concept. And Maxwell doesn't just talk about it in theory either. He shares that story about visiting Ground Zero after 9/11
Oh, yeah.
and seeing the selflessness of those first responders, how they were just focused on helping others.
It really makes you think.
It does. It reminds you that unselfish thinking is about more than just like donating money or whatever. It's about a much deeper change in how you see the world.
It's about putting others first, which Maxwell admits can be hard.
It's definitely a practice.
But he gives us some good starting points, like putting yourself in situations where you can actually see the needs of other people.
And giving without expecting anything in return.
Exactly. It's about those win-win situations where everyone benefits.
So we've talked about a lot of different thinking styles today, but now we get to what some might see as the most, well, business-oriented one, bottom line thinking.
It's easy to jump to conclusions with this one, right?
Totally. Like, oh, here comes the spreadsheets.
Right. But Maxwell is very clear that bottom line thinking is about so much more than just making money. It's about clarity, focus, results. It's about getting rid of all the distractions and focusing on what really matters.
It's like that sculptor analogy he uses, chipping away at the marble to reveal the masterpiece underneath.
Yes, it's about getting to the core of what's important. And that's true for any area of life.
Our careers, our relationships, everything.
It's about being intentional with our time and energy, making sure that what we do actually aligns with what we value. And sometimes that bottom line is not about more, more, more. Sometimes it's about simplifying.
Focusing on what brings you joy.
Exactly. Defining success on your own terms, not based on what other people think.
That's such a good point. And what I find so fascinating after this deep dive is that all of these thinking styles, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah,
It's not about picking one and sticking to it, right? It's about figuring out how they all work together
absolutely. It's about finding the right balance for you.
and being flexible.
Yeah.
Because our thinking needs to adapt and change as we do.
For sure. And Maxwell leaves us with this really powerful thought. Our thoughts determine our destiny. Our destiny determines our legacy.
Wow. So what kind of legacy do you want to leave? What small shift in your thinking can you make today to start creating that legacy? This deep dive has given you the tools, but now it's up to you. Think about it.